The date is November 17th, 1997, and Anthony J. Markavich and Patrick D. Mendoza are interviewing Judge Robert Lee Jacobs in his office in Carlisle, PA at the Frog and Switch.
Mr. Jacobs, we are going to ask you to sign a release form at the end of this. Is that okay with you?
Well, what am I releasing you from?
It's just letting the tape go into the Cumberland County Historical Society.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And just to have your permission to use this tape for the 250th anniversary.
That's fine.
All right, if we could just ask you your birth date and where you were born.
My birth date is December 17th, 1910. I was born here in Carlisle, Pennsylvania.
And what was your family's occupation?
My father was a lawyer, and he had been district attorney of Cumberland County in about 1907 to 11, I think. Something, I'm not too sure of those dates.
Was he originally from Cumberland County?
He was
born here?
He was originally from Cumberland County. He lived in Silver Spring Township, which is about where New Kingston is.
Mm-hmm.
My mother lived in Cumberland County also, and she had been a school teacher.
Where was she a teacher?
I'm not sure.
Mm.
I don't know. The school in those days were different locations than they are today. Didn't have middle schools and stuff like that. In one high school.
What part of Carlisle did you live in? Like what side of town?
Well, I lived on South College Street.
Really?
You know where the law school is.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the Graham Street is about half a block farther south, and we had a house there on the corner of Graham and College. My parents did.
Really? Yeah. Is it still standing, do you know? Or is it still standing?
It's still standing. People by the name of Humer own it.
Really?
Yeah. And the high school was on Graham Street at that time, and that was the senior high school.
Well, what are some of your earliest memories of the Cumberland County? As we were talking about the train earlier, is there anything else that stands out, perhaps at the time of the First World War?
A similar thing that I know you all heard about was what's now Dickinson College campus, where Dreher is. What was a deer park? You've heard about that? Yes, and I used to walk home at night along the deer park. There was a fence all the way around that place where the biology department in there. Well, anyway, the church is the Methodist church is there, and the law school is there. That was all part of the Moore estate.
Really?
At that time, yes.
Was that considered odd to have deer in the middle of Carlisle like that?
Well, I guess it was considered a little odd, but they were a small herd of deer.
Who maintained that?
Hmm?
Who maintained?
Well, they maintained it was privately owned. There were 2 or 3 elderly ladies. I'm not sure how many there were for sure, but they were the last of the Moore family, and they maintained it themselves.
What year was that sold to the college?
I don't know.
The 30s?
I really don't know when that was, when the college bought it.
Because I live there now, and there's no deer anymore. But
You live in Morgan.
I lived in Adams.
I don't even know what's Adams.
It's the one with the columns.
That's the new one. That's the
Yeah,
newest of those
Yeah, it is.
dormitories.
So, could you briefly describe your early schooling?
My early schooling, very simple. I went to grade school in Carlisle, and I went to high school in Carlisle, and then I went to Dickinson. I graduated in '32, right at the in the beginning of or the heart of the Depression, and it was understood that when I went to Dickinson, which was in the fall of '28, just before the Depression hit, that I would go to law school somewhere else. But then by the time I got through Dickinson, we were right in the midst of the Depression, so I went to law school here at Dickinson.
What was the college like?
Huh?
What was the college like in the late 20s? What was
Well, we had about 400 students. The girls lived at the Metzger Hall.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any idea? Do you know where that is?
That's down where the Hardee's is now on High Street, or
Well, it's out where. It's out on North Hanover Street. I think there's a Dunkin' Donuts there.
oh really?
Yeah.
Way down there.
Yeah, way out there, just before the railroad tracks.
Yeah.
That was Metzger Hall, and that Dickinson used that for a women's dormitory. In fact, that was owned by a trust in the name of George Metzger, and then it was sold, and the money came from that. It is now held by the trustees of the trust, and the income is paid over to Dickinson, supposedly for projects that are supposed to be for the benefit of women. I think they bring some lecturers here.
The Metzger Conway.
Metzger, what's the other half of it?
Conway. Yeah.
Conway. Well, that was Conway Hall, was where the freshmen lived when I first went to Dickinson.
And where was that?
And now that's where the library is.
Okay.
That was at one time called Stock Hall, and that's where Conway was.
Where did you live?
I lived at home.
Oh, did you?
Yeah,
Did you just commuted to the college?
and commuted to the college.
Was that a rare thing for a lot of local car?
No, there have been many local students that went to Dickinson.
Did you walk down, ride a bike?
I could walk. You belong to a fraternity, you know. You spent most of your time in the fraternity.
What fraternity were you in?
Phi Psi.
Phi Psi, yeah. They're still around, yeah.
Is still around.
Yeah.
So, explain what made you go into law? Was it because your father was a lawyer?
Well, really, I think that's the main reason, yeah.
And once you got out of law school, what happened next?
Well, what happened next was that I went into practice with my father, and then the Democratic County chairman came to my father and he said, I'd like to run Robert for the state senate. Now, remember this, I was just out of law school, and Dad thought that was just a waste of time because this was always a heavily Republican area. And I was a Democrat, and my family was Democratic. But I ran in 1936. I was elected to the state senate from this district. That was actually on, 36 was the year that Roosevelt carried, I think, every state in the Union to 2, something like that. And I served there for 4 years. And so I didn't run for re-election. And then Pearl Harbor came along in the fall of, or December of the 7th, 1941, Sunday. And after that, all of us wanted to do something in the war effort.
How old were you in 41? 31?
I guess I was 30 or 31.
Where were you when you found out that Pearl Harbor was
Somebody was asking that the other day. I don't know. I don't remember where I was. That was a Sunday. And we didn't have television then. It's hard for you guys to realize that, but the first television set I had was after 1950. It must have been, well, it was around 1950. And television was just beginning to be popular. So it was radio that you had to be listening to hear what was going on. And that was that war, of course, was the last popular war, the good war. Everybody was in favor of it, and everybody wanted to do what they could to help. You know how, well, even in the Korean War, nobody was very happy about going to that, and everybody tried to get out of the Vietnamese thing, but everybody felt that they wanted to do what they could at the time of the Second World War.
What was your reaction to some of the clouds of war that were going on pre-1941?
Well, yes, everybody realized that something's going to happen. We didn't know whether the United States was going to get into it.
Did you fear Hitler? You know, all this talk about Hitler. What was your?
Well, we didn't really fear Hitler because we didn't. He wasn't close enough to really frighten anybody, but everybody disagreed with what he was doing, and it was obvious that he had ambitions to rule the world.
So if we could jump back just for a moment to your time in the state senate during the Depression years.
Right.
Can you describe that? How was being in political office during those tough years? What kind of legislation were you involved in?
Well, we passed a lot of social legislation, some labor legislation, stuff like that. The unemployment compensation was enacted in that time. Things that were labor bills that I remember distinctly, like requirements that limiting the length of trains and requiring them to have a certain number of employees when they operated the trains. So that was labor legislation that went through, and as I say, unemployment compensation in Pennsylvania. Those were the things that were probably predominant, and we had a lot of regular, ordinary legislation.
Okay, so you enlisted in the Army?
No.
Or in the Navy?
No, you tried to do the best you could for yourself, So, well, first I was hopeful that maybe I could get a job with the Judge Advocate General of the Army, but that didn't materialize. And then I tried the Navy, I tried the Office of Naval Intelligence, and I wasn't successful in that. I applied for ONI, as they called it, and I didn't get that, but I was accepted for what they called an aviation volunteer program.
What was that exactly?
Well, that was we were ground officers, not flyers, but whatever was necessary to maintain the planes. And then I was sent for indoctrination to Quonset Point, Rhode Island. That actually was in the fall of 43 that I was in for 26 months.
No, so you did mechanical work on the plane?
No,
No.
no. I was they sent me to Washington. I went in as a lieutenant junior grade, and then they signed me to the Bureau of Aeronautics in Washington, and I spent the war going around the country, expediting the manufacture of things that we needed for our planes. Mostly, it was almost all electronic gear that I was buying or expediting, like capacitor analyzers and power supplies and things like that.
You traveled to a lot of the factories?
Yeah, that's right.
Did you have any siblings or friends, that went off to war, like overseas? Any brothers and sisters?
Did I? No, but I had a wife and 2 kids when I went in the service.
Really?
Yeah.
So did they live
It
with
was
you?
harder on them than it was on me. It was. They stayed at home, and everybody, I say, cooperated very very well with the war effort. We were, you had gasoline was rationed, food was rationed, fancy stuff like steaks and things like that. You had to save up your stamps, so that was always a problem for the people you left at home.
Well, having seen a lot of the country during World War II, can you explain some of the differences that there was between different regions that you traveled through?
Well, I went to, I remember going to Cleveland, to Lincoln Electric, and Mr. Lincoln, who was the head of the company, was mad at the Navy over some dispute he had with him. So he hauled me into his offices and lectured me on the Navy and stuff like that. Then I went out to BWO-NAM. I can't remember whether that was Minneapolis. I think it was Minneapolis. And the other thing that was fascinating was if you were in uniform and you were out in the western part of the United States, let's say Chicago, you never were able to buy yourself a drink or dinner or anything. Somebody always picked up the tab. But when you went to New York, that didn't happen.
Why do you think that was?
Well, that's the difference between the attitude of people out west and the people on the east. People in the east are more inclined to stick to themselves and not be overly friendly, but they're very friendly out in the western part of the United States.
Where did you see like the most patriotic section of the country? Where would you say that was? In the east or the west? Or?
Well, I don't know that I care to say that one was more patriotic than the other, but people were much more friendly if you went west of here.
during the early days of the war, when things weren't going well,
They weren't
the
going
American
very well
war,
at all.
for the American war effort, what was the attitude then of the? What was your
Everybody's
thought
attitude was you're going to
reward.
dig in and do the best you can, get as much stuff out as you can. Everybody was very poor. No, I'm sure there may have been pockets of resistance someplace, but everybody was interested in seeing the war effort succeed.
Did you ever think that the United States could lose the war? Did that ever cross your mind?
Oh, I suppose it did. I don't remember that. I'm not sure that we actually here knew how tough things were. I mean, they didn't. The press was censored a little more in those days than it is now, well, particularly the war out in the Pacific, which was the one that was really tough after Pearl Harbor, after our fleet was knocked out at Pearl Harbor. And I don't think that the papers ever told us how tough things were out in the Pacific.
What were some of your experiences being in Washington? What are some, can you explain some things that you may have seen that were a little interesting?
I stepped on Admiral King's foot one time coming out of the Navy Department, and he was the high mucky muck in the Navy. Fortunately, nothing happened over that. And I was there when Roosevelt died. That was a dramatic experience. Many of the people. Well, I have a daughter, and she never, from the time she was born, she never knew anyone to be president of the United States except Roosevelt, and it was a dramatic thing, when they put on they had his funeral in Washington. Secretary, Secretary of War, I think. He died, and he had a big funeral for him in Washington. Those things were great to watch and very impressive.
How about Roosevelt? What was the opinion? What was your opinion of Roosevelt? Were you, think he was doing a great job, or?
Well, you're asking me, and I'm a Democrat who ran on the same ticket that Mr. Roosevelt did. He was a great leader at that time. There's no question about that for the war effort, just like Churchill was in England. And I believed in a great deal of Mr. Roosevelt's programs. I thought that they did a lot for the country during the Depression, when he came out with those fireside chats and said we had nothing to fear but fear itself and all that kind of stuff. And then another thing that I profited from later on, not money way, but I love to hunt birds. I like to hunt grouse. We have a good many grouse in these mountains around here, and there was something called the CCC that he started, Civilian Conservation Corps, and they built all those little roads all through the North and South Mountains. So if you go out, you can get with a Jeep, you can get up in these mountains, places that you couldn't possibly go before, and they did stuff like that. When people were sitting around with absolutely nothing to do, why, they dreamed up these jobs to keep them busy. and it filled a definite need.
What was your feeling when you were at the Dickinson School of Law? What was your feeling about your future? Did you know, well, I got the secure job with my father? Or what were some of the feelings of maybe the others?
If I tell you what an experienced lawyer or a doctor here would make during the Depression, you'd be amazed. $3,000 or $4,000 was all they made. And so when I came out in 1935, I was admitted in the fall of 35, and that's one. The Democrats had the sheriff's office, so I was made solicitor to the sheriff. That was my first client, and I got $250 for that. In addition to that, I took in enough so that I made, and now listen to this, $365 the first year I practiced law. That was my gross. That's what I took in. The 250 plus whatever it was, enough to make up the rest of the 365. So the law practice was pretty slim in those days. What did we think? I don't know. Well, you wanted to do something. Practicing law seemed like a good idea. Anyway, I'm not here to make a speech on behalf of legal education, but you can use it in almost anything you do.
Right.
If you want to go into banking business, if you have a legal background, it helps. If you want to do almost anything, it helps.
Back to the war, like, you know, the people you served with, the people you were with, did you keep in touch with any of them?
Not very much. I had a very funny experience. I was in the Bureau of Aeronautics, in the production division, and we were in the electronics part of it. And the guys in there were almost all electronic engineers, except about 2 or 3 of us that were. I was a lawyer and a couple of businessmen. And these guys were, I mean, they were just different. That you ever associated with a bunch of engineers?
Yeah, my brother's an engineer.
And you're out of it. If you're not an engineer, you're out of it. And the same was true of these guys in electronics. If you don't know what they're talking about, well, anyway, I served with them for a couple of years, and when the war was drawing to a close, when we were getting ready to get out in the fall of 45, one of them said to me, how would you like to go along with us? We're going to Texas, and we're going to form a company. And I said, well, I'd just like to get back home to practicing law. And so that was it. But the company they formed was Texas Instruments.
Oh, jeez.
One of the guy who was a young fella in there, he became president and then chairman of Texas Instruments.
Do you feel like that was a
I missed a golden opportunity then.
Yeah, they're headquartered about 5 miles from my house back home.
Oh, is that right?
Yes.
You never knew Haggerty, did you?
No. But, they're a big company now.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I suppose that I doubt if the guys who were in it then, well, some of them may still be around, but I doubt if they're controlling shareholders of Texas Instruments anymore. But that's what they started.
Wow.
So overall, what would you consider your like most distinct memories of the World War II era?
Well, probably the frantic work that was going on down there in Washington. The Bureau of Aeronautics, everybody was working day and night to keep things moving. That was the impression that you got the whole way through.
Did Washington really grow during World War II? Did you see a boom of people?
Well, it didn't. I was wanted to move my family down there, and there were only two developments right outside of Washington where it would have been possible to find an apartment. Today there are hundreds of them. It was they were still running the trolley cars in Washington, and Washington it didn't grow in a permanent fashion until after the war. Mm-hmm. It was still the old Washington when we all went in there. Just all these people poured in. You lived wherever you could find a place. And
where did you live when you were in Washington?
Well, I
Was it
lived
Navy
in
housing?
18th and G streets. A real flea bag. And walked down to the Navy Department every day.
So they didn't put you up in the Navy Yard barracks or anything like that?
No, they didn't have any housing for military personnel, unless you were cadre at the Marine Corps barracks was right close. I had a couple friends who were Marine officers, but nobody but the people right in charge of the barracks lived there. Everybody else had to live out in Washington. It was, I suppose, it was very much like you would work today for a company. They're not going to put you up. You got to find a place to live.
And your family, did they come down with you?
No, they didn't come down. They stayed up here. We tried that. We went around and looked at a couple places, but then decided it would be more sensible to stay here.
Did you get to see them often?
Well, I get up here about every other weekend. It really wasn't too bad. I think, as I may have said, it was probably harder on my wife than it was on me.
What ages were your children?
Well, one was born in 1940 and the other was born in 43, so they were pretty small.
Now,
one was born just before I went into the service.
What date was it that you enlisted?
Well, it was I got my commission sometime in the spring of 43. And then I reported for duty on the last day of August.
Did you have any idea what you were going to do when you enlisted? When you got your commission?
No, I didn't. To tell you the truth, I thought I'd either go into fighter detection or air combat information. But then when I completed the course and we got our orders when we completed the course at Quonset Point, then they sent me to Washington. I guess my legal background is probably what they were interested in for that purpose.
So what were some of the attitudes and expectations of servicemen at the close of the war? What was the general spirit?
Well, you could stay in the service if you wanted to. They wanted to send me out to the West Coast to do contract termination.
What's that exactly?
Well, they entered into all these contracts with these companies to provide ships and airplanes and all that kind of stuff. And so when the war's over, you got to terminate them and legally work them down, so there'd be a lot of claims and all that kind of stuff. That's what that would consist of.
Did that appeal to you at all?
No, it didn't appeal. I just wanted to get back to home. I wanted to get back to practicing law.
Mm-hmm.
And most people wanted to return to civilian life. Of course, there were some I'd run into not too long ago. Some people who stayed in the service and became officers and went up pretty well in rank. But that was you had to have really something to offer, because they weren't going to have all these people in the service after the war was over. Mm-hmm. They were cutting it down.
How was the homecoming in Carlisle? Was it a celebration?
Well, people came home at different times. When you were surveyed out of the Navy, you got 30 days what they call terminal leave, and you could wear your uniform for those last 30 days, that kind of stuff. I don't remember any particular celebration. I'm sure there were some.
So it was pretty calm for when most of the guys came back to Carlisle?
Most of them came back in. Then we all paraded, on Memorial Day and stuff like that for a couple of years.
What was the overall attitude after the war? Optimism, regret? What do you think?
Well, I think there was a lot of optimism. Business began to pick up, and we started. I would think about 1947, 48. Things began to improve financially, and we were out of the Depression. So things looked pretty good. Law practice was a little slow for a while, but it picked up.
So, did you have your own practice then after the war?
Yeah.
And where was your office located?
In this back of the courthouse, where the Sentinel building used to be there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I had an office on the second floor of the Sentinel building. That's where they used to print the Sentinel.
So what was the process of how you became a judge?
Well,
How did you start? How high did you get? Because I see you Supreme Court of Pennsylvania.
that's my certificate from the Supreme Court, just saying I'm a lawyer. Well, I was elected a judge here in 1955. I practiced from the Well, I started at the end of 35, and then I was in the service for a little over 2 years. That interruption, and then I came back, practiced law for about another, oh gosh, 20 years. I practiced law for 20 years, and then I ran for judge in 55. And I was elected here in Cumberland County and served 9 years, and then I was elected to the Superior Court in Pennsylvania, which is an intermediate appeals court, and I served there for 13 years.
What are some remembrances that you have being a county judge? Any unusual things that happened?
Well, the most unusual thing that happened was on August the 2nd, 1955. But you're getting pretty far away from the war now.
That's true, yeah.
When I was running for judge, I was running against Judge Garber, who was on the bench. And on that day, a fellow by the name of Haynes was in court at noon on a non-support case and pulled out a revolver, shot the judge, and broke these upper bones in his arm, and killed one of the attorneys, shot another attorney, and that was right in the middle of the campaign.
Who did this now? Another judge?
Huh?
Another judge did?
Hadn't you ever heard this story about the judge being shot here in the courtroom?
No.
Well, that happened when I was running for judge.
He was shot by another judge?
No, he was shot by a defendant
Oh, a defendant.
on a non-support case. He was being hauled in there to make him pay his alimony.
Pretty good open up, wow.
If we could again jump back to the war years, did you lose any family or friends in the war?
Yes, I didn't lose any family. One of the boys we went to law school with was killed. 2 of them were killed during the war in my graduating class. One of them was killed very early in the war.
Do you know what he was doing? Or?
I don't.
Were there heavy casualties? From Carlisle, were there a lot of casualties?
I don't believe there weren't very heavy. Weren't very many.
Okay, the period you were in the military, what would you call like the greatest change that occurred in you? How did you change most between 1941 and 1946?
Well, if you look at my desk now, it's not very neat, but when I was in the service, it was a lot neater. You learn to stand up straight and all that kind of stuff, which I think was very important. And you let yourself slouch after you get out, and the discipline is probably the main thing that the military has to offer. It's a helpful thing,
Good life lesson?
I smoked a pipe when I went into the Navy, and then I found that carrying a pipe and tobacco in your uniform didn't look very good, so I stopped smoking a pipe. I mean, you got sort of interested in what you were doing. You learned the Navy regs, regulations, and stuff like that, and then you sort of got into the swing of the thing. Something you thought you'd never do.
Were you happy to be stateside during the war, or did you long to maybe?
Well, after it would be nice to say that I was fighting in the Pacific and all that kind of stuff. But I guess that when you come right down to it, to be honest about it, I guess I was lucky that I didn't get sent out there. You didn't have any control over where you were going to go. And you can console yourself. You're not a war hero, but at least you did the job they sent you to do.
Yeah. Everybody played a part.
That's right. And the attitude of people was so different from the way it was in the Vietnam War. I mean, you guys are even too young to have experienced much of that.
What was your opinion of Vietnam? Being a World War II veteran, how did you view?
Well, it was just a plain unfortunate war. I guess when you think back on it, we were stupid to get into it.
Immediately at the end of World War II, and immediately afterwards, communism, came into the fray. Red Scare, that kind of stuff. How did you react to that?
Well, if you mean McCarthy.
Well, all of it. I mean, you being in politics, you know the routine, and then, this communism pops up.
Well, I don't think that any of us around here ever took the communist scare very seriously.
Really?
We were never in the. We didn't see. We didn't see any evidence of it around here, like you might see in New York or Philadelphia.
Did people laugh at kind of the whole Red Scare, or were people really afraid of it?
Well, people were sort of upset by all that business of McCarthy, which became terrible because he just accused everybody, whether they had any real evidence that they had done anything to deserve it or not.
What about the Russians? I mean, did America go straight from a hatred of the Germans and Japanese, into a hatred of the Russians? What was your opinion of them immediately after?
Well, I think most everybody thought that the Russians were not too civilized. That was sort of the feeling. And you couldn't trust them. Everybody knew that, or felt that Mr. Roosevelt was too ill at Yalta to really make much of a deal for the United States. And it's just funny how, yes, that's right. Everybody was afraid of the Russians and communists, worried about the domino theory, and which got us into Vietnam and everything. And then it's just amazing how the whole thing collapsed.
Okay, apologize for that.
Yeah. The Russians were never easy to handle. And you remember, I'm sure you've read about the efforts to get into Berlin before the Russians did, and everything like that. Who was it? Patton, I guess, who wanted to get there first.
Yeah. What was your opinion of those gung-hos like Patton and all that?
Well, you got to have guys like that as a second lieutenant, and had a what do you have, a squad or something like that, and then he went back. He re-enlisted. He asked to be sent back, and then he was put in. Went in on a gunship with a general by the name of Hollingsworth, and they flew all over the place in their helicopter, and they got bullet holes in their cab and everything. And I said something to here at the War College. The chief of staff was here, and I said something about General Hollingsworth, and he said, yes. He said, those are great guys during a war, but we don't know what the hell to do with them afterwards.
Sure.
So that was, of course, Patton had a lot of trouble, with getting into slapping a soldier, and remember that story, and then he didn't really like to follow orders. He wanted to do it his own way. And Eisenhower, I guess, saved his neck a couple times.
Was there any disagreement with, the generals? I'm talking about like the citizens. I mean, was it common for people to say, what's Eisenhower doing, or
No,
I disagree.
no, I didn't hear any of that.
Right.
So you would say that the country was really behind the war.
The country was really behind the war.
So without question, almost. Without question.
Almost without question. I don't know. Of course, they kept that whole invasion of the continent so quiet that nobody knew anything about it until it happened. And no, I never really heard any criticism of Eisenhower when he after the war was over and he came home and he went to Carlisle, and the guy who by the name of Les Bentley, who owned the Molly Pitcher, had a Buick convertible, and they picked up Eisenhower at the south end of town, got him in the convertible, and he stood up and drove all the way through Carlisle. I wasn't back yet, I wasn't here when that happened.
Was that 45 then?
Well, it was in 45 or 46, probably 46.
Yeah, probably. Wow.
And then, of course, he just catapulted right into the presidency,
Were there any other big names that, appeared in town? MacArthur or?
I don't think MacArthur was ever here. Bradley was here.
Really?
Yeah. He was here at the War College.
Did they teach or were they taking classes?
No, Bradley was just here as well, he made a little talk. He was not here on the faculty or anything. He was retired by that time. Well, when Eisenhower was here, in fact, I was out there at the luncheon the day they dedicated. They had the Eisenhower room at the officers' club, and that was the day they dedicated that to him. He was here, he and Mrs. Eisenhower.
What year was that about? Was that 46 as well, or was that after he was president?
No, that was later.
So he made 2 appearances. Carlisle.
He made a number of appearances here, yeah. Yeah, we're very fortunate to have the Army War College here.
Yeah. Speaking of the War College, what changes occurred in the War College? Before the war, after the war.
Well, it was before the war, it was a medical field service school. It didn't become the Army War College until 1951. years here prior to the war.
Were a lot of wounded brought here during the war or anything like that?
Women what?
Were any wounded brought to the hospital where the war?
No. That they did that. The First World War was a hospital.
Really?
It was a hospital at the time of the First World War. But the Second World War, no, they didn't. It wasn't a hospital.
Coming back a little bit now that we're kind of brought up World War I, do you have any remembrances of the First World War?
No.
No? Too young?
Not much of that. I remember, I can remember this. I was a little kid, and some woman, Mrs. Ellsworth, that wouldn't be named, of course, came running out of her house to yell that the war was over. And that was that false armistice. They had a false armistice in the First World War, and that was what happened that day, and the armistice didn't happen until a little time after that. I don't know how much.
When do you remember when the false armistice was?
Well, that was in 1918. But I mean, the armistice was on the 11th of November, and this was probably a month ahead of that.
Huh. Do you remember any homecoming from World War I? Any of those?
Well, yeah, there was more homecoming from World War I, more organized than I think that the Company G, I believe it was, pretty much marched home when they came home.
Company G is what? Do you remember?
Well, I don't know, 28th Division, I guess. Yeah, it was really, there was more of a organized type of return from the First World War.
Do you agree with how historians look back at the Second World War now as you had mentioned earlier, the good war? Do you agree with that view that people have of it now, or do you see it as something different than later generations look at it?
Well, it's a good war in the sense that I believe it turned out right for the success of the world. And it was a pretty well-waged war. I don't think that we were guilty of too many atrocities.
Speaking, on those terms of the atomic bomb, what was your opinion?
What?
Of the atomic bomb? What was your opinion on it?
Well, that's it. I prefer to go along with the view that it was necessary to end the war and keep us from having to send so many soldiers into Japan, lose so many lives. One president who has grown very much in public esteem is probably Harry Truman. And whether he was right or wrong, he felt that he was right, and he went ahead and did what he thought had to be done.
What do you think of President Truman?
Well, I thought he was a guy who had a very humble origin and really came up to the job.
Do you think he followed Roosevelt's lead well, or do you think he kind of went on his own?
He was very different from Roosevelt, very different. And Roosevelt never gave him any help either.
Mm-hmm.
He did it on his own.
He'll probably go down as one of the good ones of the 20th century.
I think so. That's what they say a lot more good things about him today than they did 25 years ago.
What do you think of Eisenhower becoming
things got very prosperous during Eisenhower's regime as president.
So you think he did a good job?
Well, I don't think he worked too hard at it, but I think that everybody had confidence in him, and he stabilized the country. No question about it.
Politics today, you being so involved in politics over the span of, 30 years or whatever, from state house to being a judge, what is your opinion
Of what?
of politics today? Are you still involved at
No,
all?
I'm not involved anymore. No, I got out of that when I got off. Well, I got out of that. When you're a judge, you're not supposed to be in politics anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So I was never very active after I became a judge. That's a long time ago. I'm one of the few people who probably thinks that the parties aren't as. I think the fact that the parties are not as strong as they used to be is not entirely a good thing, because we've had a lot of judges on the bench that got on there in spite of the parties. In other words, the parties in the old days used to be able to say they would endorse X to run for judge, and he was pretty sure to be elected. Now today, somehow a couple of judges have gotten themselves elected to the appellate courts by coming out with things like saying they're never going to foreclose on any mortgages again, and gotten elected in spite of the parties. And so I bewail the fact that the parties aren't as strong as they used to be, because I think that they were careful not to put poor judges on the bench. Now, this may not make much sense to you, and I'm not making it very clear. Actually, the political parties are not as strong as they used to be. They can't. Mr. Clinton got himself elected pretty much. It wasn't a real party endorsement that he got. He got himself elected by a lot of smart political moves and that kind of stuff. Well, man, I'm putting this to you very poorly, because I'm trying to looking at it from a judge's point of view. I preferred it when either the Republican or Democratic Party in Pennsylvania could designate a candidate for the appellate courts and be sure they could elect him. And they were very careful. Both parties will always be very careful to pick qualified people for the judgeships. And we've gotten some poor appellate judges because of the parties didn't have the power to control it.
Uh-huh.
That's a funny way of looking at it, because you I'm sure hear about all the backroom stuff that goes on in parties, and maybe that did or does, but the parties just don't have the power they used to have. I'm sure. Are you guys working for any party?
No,
Not now, but
I did. Yeah.
yeah,
Well, you can, and I think you should.
It's an experience.
Well, it's not only an experience; it gives you a basic understanding of how our democracy works.
I have a question. Do you hold, say, like Clinton and Bush in the same esteem as you did, Roosevelt and Truman? Do you think they're, as qualified presidents?
was at the impressionable age at that time, but Roosevelt was a giant in those days. Just as Churchill. See, these guys that came up in the Second World War, like Churchill and Roosevelt and Eisenhower, Rommel, Montgomery, they were giants.
Yeah.
And you keep looking for people like that today. Now, maybe circumstances made them giants. I don't know. But it's hard to find people of that stature today. Because they had an opportunity, a war and all that would maybe made them giants.
Yeah.
But,
They seem larger than life now.
it's like you go back to people like George Washington and Alexander Hamilton, people like that. But I don't know whether the times made them or they made the times. That's it. Don't get me wrong about George Bush. I think George Bush is one of a very, very fine man. I really do. He was. I guess his political sense wasn't as good as Bill Clinton's. That's about it.
I don't know. He's a fellow Navy man, so.
But I think politics is I don't like to hear people say, "Oh, he's just a politician." It's a fair, it's a fine occupation. I think that it's very important to this country.
Okay, looking back at the Second World War,
Would you do it again? if
Well, I have no regrets about it, if you want to put it that way.
yeah.
Or whether I would do it again is at my age, they wouldn't let me.
would you encourage, the young people today to, let's say there's an outbreak of war, would you encourage that go-get-'em attitude again?
Well, it all depends upon what the situation is. But I would encourage young people to back their country, of course, definitely.
Well, Mr. Jacobs, is there anything that you would have liked us to ask you? Is there anything you'd like to comment on that maybe we didn't cover and you had in mind?
No, I think I've covered it pretty well. It's hard to imagine, but during that Second World War, you didn't want to be out of it. You wanted to have something to do with it, whether you were sitting here on a draft board or a ration board or whatever it was. You wanted to, even what did they have, those airplane spotters and stuff like that. Everybody wanted to do something, and that was the spirit that existed at that time, and we won that war. That, I think, is the important part of it.
Okay, well, I thank you, Judge Jacobs. Thanks very much with us this afternoon.
We're going to need you to fill in the
Well, we
relief.
covered the whole thing. I don't know that I can